Hello and welcome to Group Chat. I am Justin Verrier, and joining me, Rob Mahoney, Big Woz. Gentlemen, we have officially hit the stretch run in the 2024-25 season. 49 days left on the NBA season, about 7 weeks left. Rob, how are you feeling? How are your legs? How is your wind?
My wind is consistently awful, but I think stretch run might be generous, Justin. You know, we got some teams that are really fighting for something. I think this weekend and the slate was indicative of where we are, which is just some absolute wallopings, some separation of the, is it the wheat from the chaff? Is that the expression? I don't know which one. I don't know which one is the wheat and which one is the chaff. Whichever one is the better side of things. We're starting to see, some teams like the Celtics, for example, even further distinguish themselves from the field. We're starting to see some of the actual contenders and actual challengers in the West finally making a name for themselves, finally making a play in the standings. It's an exciting time, but there's also, I think, going to be a lot of crummy March basketball ahead of us. So I cannot say I'm looking forward to that.
Woz, how are you doing? You're on the East Coast. What's the buzz there? Are people talking about the Miami Heat potentially getting out of the play-in?
No, although I'm in Georgia, I'm still surrounded by Knicks fans. There is panic starting to creep in about the piss poor New York Knicks defense. I
Yeah.
think people are starting to see the writing on the wall about the problems of this team.
Well, we're going to hit that today because we are going to go through, I think, 5 questions we have about the new world order that we have been given gratefully by the gods at the trade deadline. Unlike previous seasons, it just feels like the NBA just shook the snow globe, and there's just so much to dig in here, even though there are only, as we mentioned, probably less than 2 months left on the calendar. I think we got to start in Los Angeles, where Luka Doncic looks pretty fucking good. I knew that he was back when early in the game he started barking at a referee. I was like, uh-oh, we might be onto something there. And then he went off the rest of the game. I was like the fan after Luka hit the 3, looked at him and just gave him the thumbs up. That was basically me that entire game. Rob, what did you see in that game against the Denver Nuggets this weekend?
The Luka stuff is great. That's wonderful. I think that's kind of business as usual and more or less what we expect from Luka Doncic, especially as he rounds back into form. I find myself even more impressed with the Lakers defense, which I've been in kind of wait and see mode as they've been quietly one of the better defensive teams for the last couple months. But I was kind of, I wanted to see them prove it in games that mattered. I wanted to see, especially post AD, how they would look and what their kind of regular form would be. And this was a pretty reassuring statement from the Lakers that when they put their minds to it, when they have the dedicated game plan, when they give a shit at the highest possible levels, and they've been doing that for the last couple months, they can knock out a team that we're taking pretty seriously in the Denver Nuggets. I come away very impressed with what the Lakers have been able to accomplish.
Yeah, so I watched the Charlotte game the other night where they were up, like kind of controlling that game, like 13 points up, and then they kind of just fell asleep at the wheel and found themselves in a street fight and kind of couldn't be woken up in time to save the results. And I think the main problem of that game, if you watched it, was just like Luka, trying to be deferential, which often happens when like these superstars come together. Nobody wants to be the person sort of taking the reins and be like, oh, this is going to be my operation. Like people are just like kind of overpassing, being overly deferential. And there was a lot of that in the Charlotte game. And I think what made me nervous about the Charlotte game was that it felt like Luka was in quicksand. Like he could not get by a single person, and he took so many jumps. Like he didn't take any shots in the paint. And Luka's a guy that gets to the basket. Like if you guard him one-on-one, a lot of times he's just gonna put you on his back and get to the rack. He did none of that against Charlotte, and I'm like, maybe the calf is still an issue. And then in Denver, like the adjustment was just basically like let Luka control your offense. He's a walking top 5 offense. He's been so for 5 freaking years. And surprise, surprise, the Lakers look much better for it. And yeah, I think there is something to the defense and the extra spring in the step of one LeBron James. It seems like this guy, it's basically since the Luka trade, even before Luka got onto the court, since they've traded for Luka, go look at LeBron's numbers. This guy has been playing differently. And so I think all of those things are combined. Yes, exactly. He's not missing any games either. Yeah.
Yeah,
unless
I
you
thought that
count
was
the
kind
All-Star game.
That's right. I thought it was kind of a bit or some sort of personal challenge he was giving to himself in the midst of the season that probably was going to end up in a finals bid. But LeBron is engaged and looks revitalized in a way that like he wasn't even in the previous 2 seasons. The Lakers, up until about a month ago, were an offense-only team. And it was basically Anthony Davis having to swat away whatever incoming drivers like he was Godzilla with all the planes all around him. Because there was just everything kind of just zooming around him. There was no one else to stop anybody. But they just didn't have the extra juice, the extra kick in order to knock out teams with that offense. Now the Lakers seem like, we'll talk about the defense, we should, but it seems like they have an identity. Their identity is amplified because now they have Luka Doncic in the mix there. So when they want to just like ramp up the offense, they have that extra kick to the point where they're playing now one of the best creators in NBA basketball pretty much an entire game, because when LeBron sits, then it's Luka and the guys, and when LeBron is out there, he's orchestrating guys. So like the rest of the team, where I might otherwise have issues with some of the spots that they have, Rui, for instance, a guy that we've kind of dinged in the past year, doesn't look as bad when LeBron is the one giving him the opportunities to make the best of his talents.
Yeah, I mean, to have that kind of collective playmaking, to have the Luka-LeBron dynamic, not just in terms of problem solving, but LeBron as a finisher for Luka Doncic has turned out to be a pretty potent
nice
combination. Guess what? But also, like, low-key, the Dorian Finney-Smith trade is starting to pay off in a huge way, right? Like trading some of the guards for some rangier forwards, getting Jared Vanderbilt back, like all of these elements kind of snapping into place while incorporating Luka Doncic is, I think, why the Lakers are starting to look dramatically different. Clearly, there's still some things to shake out and to work out in the process. Like, you don't just drop games against the Utah Jazz and not worry about it in some way. So as an every night performer, I'm not quite sure where they are right this second, and I'm not sure they need to be a finished product right now. But as far as what their ceiling could be, we're starting to see some pretty good evidence that this is a really competitive team in the West, particularly as you look around the conference and think, oh, that's a good team but has some flaws. That's another good team but has this kind of issue that they're dealing with. That's another good team, but they have these injuries. There is kind of a why not the Lakers thing happening as far as a challenger to OKC. I'm not saying they're going to beat the Thunder, but I think they could end up making a little run here.
Here's my question, though. Go ahead.
Sorry, just one last thing about the Lakers and what they're sort of showing this at this point in the season. I was, one of the foremost Darvin Ham defenders in the media. I thought he got a bit of an unfair shake. And then, early results in terms of the season, especially in December, where the Lakers defense completely cratered. And I was like, guys, like, this is what Darvin Ham was kind of like dealing with the entire season. I got to say, the fact that JJ Redick has been able to turn this around, like the team just is responding to him in a way that they just didn't to Darvin Ham. And I think he deserves some credit for that. Much to Justin Verrier's chagrin.
Yeah. Can we get a JV check-in on the JJ Redick experience? Where are you right now?
I think, as you guys will recall, I mean, you could look up the viral videos that were going around from earlier this season. I specifically wasn't necessarily critiquing JJ as a coach, but perhaps as a personality. If anything, that sort of impulse that I don't like about him as a media member is actually what's made him a pretty good coach, which is that he's just like meticulously detailed to the point where he was up here in Portland in the pregame press conference, and you could see the other beat writers practically having to add caveat on top of sample size because they're just so worried because JJ's going to come over the top and be like, well, what about this and like the sample size of this and like you didn't use your Banshees correctly on the ghost screen and all this other stuff. It's a real masterclass up there.
Not the Banshees. You got to use the Banshees correctly.
You got to use those Banshees. But I think that what you're identifying there is probably where I find myself on both sides of things. On the one hand, they are more detail oriented, and I do wonder if some of the guys that they brought in over the past 2 years, I would say, fit that mold. A guy like Rui, a guy like Dorian Finney-Smith, they're just like able to be deployed and coachable and versatile enough that they fit the vision of what a JJ Redick team probably wants to be. The one thing I do wonder, though, is that it seems like they were particularly zeroed in on this game and probably this next game against Dallas. And it seems like they had almost punted some of the earlier games. Maybe they won the game in Portland, but that was a struggle. The Charlotte game looked like a mess in order to make this game where they proved their point. The defense against Jokic might have been some of the best defense we've seen against Jokic. Whether or not the Nuggets were like fully engaged in that game, I don't know. But it seems like what they are tailored for is a playoff setting. And I do wonder in the regular season it's going to be more mixed. If anything, I think they might be a better playoff team than a regular season team.
They might be, but they're still fourth place in the West as of our recording. So it's not like they're in a bad spot.
Which we would not have predicted before the season started.
Absolutely not.
I did say that they were in the mix. If we're going to keep looping back into my takes, they are in the mix. Right.
You did say they were in the mix, and they are firmly in the mix. And if that was their approach, zeroing in on Denver in particular, and I mean the Dallas game is going to have a life of its own. But the Denver game is important because I think this Lakers team, as they're trying to figure out how to navigate this season, need to understand where their advantages are and what are the matchups that are actually going to work for them. And this Denver one, despite the recent history of that series between the Lakers and the Nuggets, is actually looking like something that they might be able to at least make competitive, if not entirely pull off. And if you were to kind of power rank what a second round series might look like for the Lakers, I think in order of preference, Memphis is probably the best potential second round opponent if the Lakers can get to the second round on the board. The Nuggets, I think, might be second if you're looking at kind of a top four chalky result. And then I think the Thunder are actually a pretty tough matchup for them as currently constructed. We have this idea of the Lakers as, oh, that's a team that can flex their guile and can outmuscle the Thunder. But this is not the big imposing Lakers team that it used to be. It is a small ball unit. They don't really have a center. They don't want to play Jackson Hayes that much, frankly. And if you're a small ball team, I would not want to play OKC. That's kind of a nightmare scenario. So adding Luka, granted, who's kind of the boogeyman in Oklahoma City, that helps, and it helps shift the nature of that matchup. But overall, if they could get into an advantageous first-round matchup and then find themselves against Denver or Memphis in the second round, you can now see a way through for the Lakers, which is just not something I ever imagined us saying a month ago.
So what's the ceiling is the question I have down here. It sounds like Rob is topping out at probably Western Conference Finals. I tend to agree with him, especially the way that the matchups are kind of planning out there. Maybe they get to 2 or 3, but most likely they'll end up somewhere where they are right now. They're currently 4, so you're looking at a Houston Rockets first-round series, and then probably the Thunder right after that. Where would you slot them? Do you think that they can make it to the finals?
I think the West is so jumbled up under OKC. Like, if you beat OKC, why do you think you can't beat any other team in the West? I guess it is matchup specific, right? And so I think their ceiling is the finals. Because I don't think OKC is some unbeatable outfit. Like, I've been saying that all year. I'm not saying that I would necessarily pick the Lakers, particularly in a head-to-head series, but let's just say they avoided OKC because they were upset somewhere else in the bracket. I don't see why they would go up against Denver or Memphis, like you guys mentioned, Houston, like all of these other teams, and think, oh, we can't do it. Or somehow if Golden State, wink, wink, was able to get a little run going in the playoffs, right? Like, I don't see why they should look at any of those teams as impossible to beat.
Yeah, the one thing that I'm tracking over the next couple of weeks here for the Lakers before they even get to the playoffs, I do wonder how the crunch time just orchestration is really going to sort itself out there. I don't think LeBron and Luka are going to have any problems. They haven't had any problems pretty much from the jump. You already have LeBron doing I'm the wide receiver for the quarterback sort of quote. So it's all a cutesy love affair going on here. But I have noticed that when LeBron wants to take over late, including in that game in Portland, he does want to jack from 3 in the same way that Luka just by nature does. Like, the best advantage is Luka stepping back and hitting those moonball threes that nobody can guard. It kind of puts LeBron in a situation where he almost has to be more, I wouldn't say a role player, but he does have to do more physical dirty work. Like, he has to set the screens. He has to be the one moving off the ball. The stuff that he can do, but I'm almost wondering at 40, is it easier actually to do that stuff, which is more physically taxing because and that's what he's put so many millions of dollars into his body for, rather than trying to be the one just driving the ball, the one setting everything up? Because we saw in the playoffs against Denver last year, he only had so much of that power bar in him, and then as soon as it dropped, it was over. And so I almost wonder yes, there's stuff to figure out, but I almost like this version of LeBron. I almost wonder if this actually extends, he could extend his career beyond what even he might think he can do at this point.
For sure.
I mean, just think about all the times we've watched Luka in the playoffs or even some regular season games where he's destroying the team one-on-one matchups and they start trapping this guy basically a little bit above half court. Now imagine it's LeBron setting those screens and these teams are putting two on the ball and LeBron is getting the ball going downhill with the 4-on-3 advantage.
I
Like this
know.
stuff, come on. Like they're like, I think the crunch time stuff is going to be fine.
I mean, that's the way to think about it. Is you have a Luka Doncic offense. Ultimately, is I think what the Lakers will end up being, and LeBron is the most overqualified version of Draymond Green we've ever seen. A 40% three-point shooter, an incredible driver, still great at getting to the line. Like he is the best version of so many of the archetypes of players that Luka has already played with. He's just not, save maybe like a 7-foot lob finisher, but he can, fight for those lobs too and get pretty vertical as a threat in those situations as well. So Luka knows how to play with someone like LeBron, even though he's barely played with LeBron. If anything, it's just going to open up new possibilities for both of them. And some of that's going to come down to their willingness to play slightly different kinds of roles, try slightly different kinds of things, just kind of flesh out what already comes naturally to both of them.
Are you ready for the Rui Renaissance, Rob? He looked pretty good, like guarding or at least like throwing his body in front of Jokic.
Does he need a renaissance? He's been fine.
He's been pretty good, I would say.
What is he renaissancing from?
Well, according to you, it was like being just an absolute dog shit player.
That was as a Washington Wizard, which, as we know, takes its toll on anybody. But
that's true.
I didn't think he was a dog shit player, but I do think you struck on something important, which is there are certain kinds of players who do need a level of JJ Redick style direct instruction and can really benefit it from, who do need a level of like LeBron James or Luka Doncic on court traffic control. And Rui is one of these guys. Like, you take some of that lift off of him and help him get into his spots and help him understand his role even better and streamline things in a way that can make him really effective. And all of a sudden he turns into a big imposing forward who can do lots of different things for you. It's just a matter of putting guys in the best possible positions. And there's no question that over his time as a Laker, overall the franchise has done a very good job of that. And I would say even more so potentially now that there's another great playmaker involved.
Listen, I'm old enough to have lived through the Rui in the second half against Jokic adjustment, alleged adjustment chatter. I'm kind of done thinking of Rui as a defensive guy. I've had all these hopes for years that somebody with his physical profile could become a more imposing kind of defender. If he's average on that end, the Lakers got plenty.
Right.
Yeah. I do think the defense will ultimately be the concern there, because you saw even in that Hornets game, like, you could attack Luka pretty easily if there aren't other guys you can throw into the mix. It's either going to be Luka and Reeves in basically every pick and roll and every crunch time playoff series from here on out. And so, like, a guy like Rui, a guy like Dorian Finney-Smith, like, has to be your lockdown defender. I just don't know if those guys are ever going to get to that point.
Maybe not. But yeah, Woz mentioned the quicksand that Luka was in some of his early games. I don't know what's thicker than quicksand, but defensively against Charlotte, he was stuck in it. Like, he just could not move in some of those pick and rolls. And, Austin Reeves has to feel pretty relieved in that way, Justin. I would think he's probably going to get targeted a little bit less, even though he still will be a target. There's a pressure lifted off his shoulders in more ways than one.
I do appreciate how they've managed to work Austin Reeves into every photo of LeBron and Luka, where it's like, it's our new big three.
It's the big three.
Just one last thing that I have noted as I've been watching the Luka Lakers. Sorry for the belated All-Star take. I know everyone is full of those things, but I almost wonder if the reason why All-Star no longer works is that we literally get All-Star pairings that we never thought we would in regular season basketball. Like, I remember a couple years ago being like, oh, LeBron playing off of Luka. This is so incredible. Like, I finally get to see Allen Iverson passing to Michael Jordan, whatever cockamamie fantasy situation we can cook up. It's now reality. We see these guys play together not only just like once, but like oftentimes multiple times, where like James Harden has basically played with every teammate he's had from the Thunder like 2 to 3 times at this point.
But Justin, this is a 2019-ass take. The super team era is basically done, right? Didn't we already leave it?
I didn't think we would get this. This is
certainly.
This is wild.
Unless we're still calling Phoenix a super team, the era's done.
Well, the results speak for themselves. They're really doing it every night.
Honestly, I'm getting a lot of Magic and Kareem vibes from the pairing, and it's wild because it's almost like Magic and old Magic. It's just remarkable that this exists and we get to watch this all the time. So we'll be tracking that going forward. Number 2 on the docket, the Golden State Warriors. Can Jimmy Butler's face-melting dark arts work in the Western Conference? And Waz, I see the floor to you because you dropped a bit of a spicy little meatball in our group chat the other day.
I think the Dubs can go to the finals. I truly do. And it's just literally the singular greatness of their 3 best players, man. Like Draymond, and now Jimmy also quarterbacking the defense and telling guys where to go and dissecting offenses that way. I look. Golden State hasn't played the best competition. I get that, but just watch what they're doing. I kind of thought that Jimmy would fit in perfectly because he worked in a similar offense. It's just that Miami was creating this perimeter havoc with Duncan Robinson and Tyler Hero. Uh, Now it's Steph Curry creating panic for defenses at the 3-point line while Jimmy Butler just has a damn parade to the free throw line every single night. I think they're scary. I think teams out west should be worried about this team. And, they're fairly deep. Like, it's not a super thin team. They have like quality. Like, look, these guys aren't world beaters. We know that, but they have quality role players around.
Oh yeah,
what Jimmy and Steph and Draymond are providing for the team. And yeah, they've just never had something like Jimmy Butler. Like, this guy lives at the free throw line. He is a threat at the basket at all times. And if teams are deploying resources to try to stop that, then that means Steph is even more freer to roam on the perimeter. They're becoming a pick your poison kind of thing. And I think more importantly, and everybody's noticed it, there's just the extra pep in his step. Draymond is more inclined to bully guys now. Like, it's just like they just feel different now that Jimmy has injected himself into this team.
Well, if you think about just the psychology, if you've been on the Warriors all season or even last season, you're going into these games, if you're Steph, knowing you have to save some gas in the tank because every possession that's about to explode is going to come back to you and you're going to have to figure out what to do with it. You're going to be the only thing keeping this team afloat offensively. And there's going to be a stretch of the game where because of you or Draymond or anyone else involved on the roster, there's just going to be like 4 straight turnovers and it's going to feel like a disaster and the ground is going to come out from underneath you. That's just Golden State Warriors basketball. The difference is now Steph doesn't have to save himself in that way. The lows don't feel so low. The deficits don't feel insurmountable. Like, there's no situation where I would look at with Golden State in the middle of a game and say they can't dig their way out of this. And that is a dramatic shift from where this team has ultimately been. And I think you nailed it, Waz. I think the biggest thing is just the dynamic of a Jimmy Butler who is a classic spoiler, one of the great spoilers in modern NBA history in terms of his ability to punch up and beat supposedly superior opponents and oust them from playoff series, now working alongside a teammate who just takes all of the attention and all of the oxygen. Like, Steph is such a neon sign that forces people to pay attention to him. And now Jimmy Butler just gets to coast into 20 points in frankly the easiest 20 he's probably ever had. Super efficient, despite the fact that he can't shoot anything from 3 yet. He's just going to be such a valuable, like, multifaceted tool for them in a way that, yeah, clearly they've never had, but also definitely makes them more formidable.
Listen, stars like to play with stars. You guys know that better than anybody. Just like it adds, it uplifts all boats, whatever idiom you want to throw out there. But more than that,
oh God,
I think the Warriors have lacked a pragmatic problem solver practically since Kevin Durant left. You even saw them flirting with adding a vertical spacing big like James Wiseman, but it's also like you heard them like in the mix for other guys too, just because they like the idea of when things get tough, they could just throw it down to the big old guys and he can get a bucket for them.
They flirted with like Brandon Ingram. Like, could Brandon Ingram be the pragmatic option? No, he cannot. But guess what? Jimmy Butler can.
He's averaging 9.2 free throws in the 6 games that he's played for the Warriors. That would be second behind just Giannis in the NBA over the course of a full season. He is the duct tape for whenever this team needs. But it's not just that Steph can't go get you a bucket. It's just that when you need a solution, just working his way to the free throw line is such an easy way to stop all of the bleeding, to slow things down, to reset, and just like come up with a solution. It's awesome to watch what he's been able to give to them thus far.
He's just super resourceful. And I think the free throws are so important, and it's something that Golden State just has not had. And it's why, despite the fact that his jumper isn't really cashing yet from distance, he's basically one of the leaders in true shooting for Golden State right now, despite that, because he gets to the line so often. And so he's finishing inside, he's drawing fouls, he's such an important connector for them already. His chemistry with Draymond is already really good. His chemistry with Moses Moody is already really good. I just like the way he interlocks with basically every component of the roster. And what he's ultimately going to do for the rotation is just, it's worth its weight in gold. This is why you make this kind of deal, to make the life of every single person, most importantly Steph Curry, significantly easier.
Well, what do you think about Waz's take, Rob, about Warriors challenging for the finals? Because right now they are in 9th. They are, they're only 1.5 games back from the Clippers in 6th, so they could get into that top 6 mix, but I think getting into like the top 4 would be a lot. They basically have to play like
6 should be their goal.
Basketball the entire. Yeah, right.
Six would be great, and I think especially staying out of the play-in mix and staying out of that 7-8 vortex is very important for them. Ultimately, I feel like I might be higher on where the Thunder are right now than you guys, and to me, I just don't see this Golden State team beating the Thunder. For a lot of the reasons I just laid out with the Lakers. Like, if you play small, and this starting lineup for Golden State is real small, right? Like, they're now basically playing Draymond at the 5 full time. Steve Kerr has more or less committed to it. We'll see. Maybe there'll be like a random Quentin Post start in there somewhere along the line. But this is kind of who they are and how they want to play, and that style against all of those like swatting hands with the Thunder and everyone feasting on every passing lane. I'm just imagining the wild Draymond Green passes in the second quarter and the kind of flurry that can result from that. And so that's the kind of matchup I'm worried about if I'm Golden State. Any other matchup on the board kind of feels doable. Like I think they could push Memphis. I think they could be another team like the Lakers that packs the paint and surrounds Jokic and makes things really hard on him. Like the level of defensive activity that Golden State is capable of puts them into the mix against a lot of these teams that technically have more firepower than them.
Yeah, for me, the anti Thunder thing is just the team exactly like Golden State, a veteran-laden team, just straight up out executing them in big postseason possessions, just never making a mistake on any of the biggest possessions and just locking in.
But Golden State does. Series. They love to make a mistake on the biggest possession.
They have a lot of them. They do, where Steph just throws like a floater into that post entry, and then the guy comes from like way across half court and steals it because the ball was in the air for so long. Like, they do have that in them. But like I said, I watched Steph and freaking Gary Payton Jr. and Andrew Wiggins figure out how to win a championship 3 years ago. You add Jimmy Butler to this thing. I just feel like maybe they just got another just out executing every single team run within them.
They're clearly a Justin Verrier honorary in the mix team. There's no doubt about it.
TM, baby. They have Kuminga presumably coming back within the next couple of weeks. I don't know if it's a good or bad thing. I do think the athletic punch will be interesting next to Jimmy. I think he can get him involved in ways he probably hadn't been before. Unfortunately, I think it probably cramps the spacing if we're thinking that he's going to be a long-term closing 5-man next to Draymond and Jimmy, because that's one thing that really hasn't come to bear yet is like Jimmy's spacing is going to screw things up. He can solve problems, but he's also, when it comes to the three-point math, it is going to provide some sort of a crunch there. So we'll see. He hasn't had an effect on young guys, though, so maybe Kuminga plays above his head in the same way that Pods and even Moody has been playing a little bit better. But I honestly agree with you, Rob. I think the Thunder are far and away the best team in the Western Conference, and if anything, they might be a little underrated at this point. I'm starting to think to myself that the Thunder might be on a Celtics narrative from last season where it's like every statistical indicator is basically telling you this team could be like historically good, but we're just like getting a little too caught up in the way things look, the fact that they're a little too young, maybe they're not as physical as they need to be, and I'm just like, I don't know. It seems like they have everything you would want against any team in any matchup.
Yep. So to me, To me, they remind me of the first Warriors championship run, the 2015 Warriors that ended up winning the championship, but like was extremely vulnerable. Like they could have lost to Memphis.
Was
They
we're
could
we're
have.
all vulnerable,
Exactly.
what do
They
you
could
what do
have
you
lost
want
to
from
the
them?
beat down Cavs. The Cavs had no Kyrie, no Kevin Love. They went down 2-1, I think it was, to those Cavs. Like they ended up ultimately winning it, but they were a very vulnerable squad, right? Because of their youth, because of their inexperience. And I think it wasn't because they didn't have the talent. And so that's what I think is going on with OKC here.
Yeah, OKC is not the type of team that's going to win a shootout, especially against some of these teams. But a lot of these teams in the West are a little bit more methodical in how they go about their offense. Anyway, there aren't like a real like juggernaut, knock you out of the park offense like the Knicks and the Celtics in the Eastern Conference. Here's a question.
One of the things that I'm worried about with OKC and kind of thinking about now, friend of the pod, Mo Dakhil, kind of turned me on to this idea and got me churning about it of like how schemable is the Thunder defense in a playoff series. Like if you give a team time to really focus and think about and tailor their style to the way the Thunder play, how solvable is that? And I think from a size perspective, you can see it. You can understand the angles if you have
They're
some of these big.
small.
They're
Slight.
definitely small, and I think there maybe is something too, despite how active the Thunder are. If you know those swipes are coming, and you have basically days, and ultimately over the course of a series, like the better part of weeks, to get used to that style of play. Can you acclimate it? Can you have better ball protection? And I think the answers to those things are going to differ wildly based on which Western Conference contender we're talking about. But I'm open to that idea that ultimately what is a historic regular season defense might turn out in the playoffs to be a very good defense, but one that is not unsolvable for some of these other teams that are vying for the West.
Here's one last question I have about the Warriors. Maybe you could take this. Do you wish they had made a follow-up move after the Jimmy Butler trade? Because we talked about this around the deadline. In theory, they did have another move out there using some of the rest of their draft picks in order to make the most of this specific team. We talked about Vooch. I don't know if that would have been the right pull there, but someone of that caliber, you trade away the Peyton contract, maybe the Looney contract and a pick, and you have one more solid top 8 rotation player. Would you have liked that more?
I think for better or for worse, Golden State loves their guys. And I think Peyton Jr. or the second is indicative of that. Like internally, they absolutely love the guy. Same goes for Looney. And so, first of all, these people had to be dragged kicking and screaming into the Jimmy Butler deal, guys. Like it's not as if that deal weren't there. Like they were trying to avoid this thing and were just willing to watch this mediocre ass product just sail through and along. And so I'm not really that mad that they didn't make a supplementary move. They'll go through the playoffs, and I think this offseason they'll try to address any of the shortcomings, but I'm not surprised. I'm not mad either, especially having done this level of upgrade again. The guy in Jimmy Butler, who 2 years ago took a outmanned Miami Heat outfit and brought them to the NBA Finals, dude. To replace Andrew Wiggins with that guy is I'm happy about that guy. Like the Warriors are freaking interesting again.
All right, let's flip to the Eastern Conference now. It seems like the top 2 pretty much set at this point. But unfortunately, the Knicks were a team that used to be in that mix, a team that seemed like if things just went right, if the starting lineup played just every single minute possible, that they could be on the level of the Celtics and the Cavs. But unfortunately, over the past, since February, so 9 games, worst defense in the NBA. What's the read emanating from New York right now? Are people getting worried?
Yeah, I think people are finally worried about the defense because it's not just been bad. Like 30th in the NBA. I'm sorry, like that's just inexcusable, unacceptable, not going to get it done. And their offense is elite enough that they haven't lost 9 games in a row during that stretch or anything like that. They haven't fallen off a cliff, but it's that they've played some of the best teams, particularly in their conference, got pasted by Cleveland, and most of that was because the defense was piss poor. I was just watching First Take, and Tim Legler said, I don't think I've ever seen an NBA game before where the first 4 baskets were dunks. That was the Knicks' freaking
Yeah.
defense against Cleveland the other night. And then last night, or yesterday, excuse me, afternoon, against the Celtics, it was more the same, just a pace thing. And, again, we understand you start Jalen Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns, you're not going to exactly be feeling like the bad boy Pistons here. Okay. Bruce Bowen is not looking at this defense and his eye is sort of like watering. No, like this is just a bad this was never going to be a very good defense. But I don't see any reason why they have to be this freaking horrible.
Yeah, they just had no shot. It's becoming very clear that against offenses of a certain caliber, if you have high-level pick-and-roll threats, if you have really sophisticated action, they just get lost and they get stretched out. And the number of possessions that are not just ending in dunks, but like nobody even in the vicinity dunks and layups. Just absolutely no chance to impact the play whatsoever. To me, is not just a glaring red flag, but it's a huge problem in terms of the way the team is constructed, because you want OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges and Josh Hart, and granted, some of those guys have been in and out of the lineup lately to complicate this, but their ability to cover ground and paper over things is why the team is set up the way that it is. Because this cannot be a full-time switching defense. This has to be one that is making up for what Jalen Brunson gives up, that's making up for Cat's inability to defend the rim. Like, you have to do it collectively. And you have to do it collectively at a level that at least gets you, to Waz's point, like close to league average, close to decent. And they've had moments of that, and overall, on balance, they're not a disastrous defense this season. They just, like, to see them regress in this way against this caliber of opponent just makes you question their ability to compete in any kind of series of any actual magnitude in the East. Like, how could you come out of this weekend feeling great or feeling even remotely confident about the Knicks relative to the Cavs and the Celtics? Like, those are the two styles they have to be able to compete with, and they can't even hang on the floor with them.
Yep, so they're now 0-7 against the Celtics Cavs in Thunder, which is not very good. It's tough because on the one hand, it seemed like that game was over within the first 5 minutes. They missed a couple of shots. The Celtics ran it back on them, and it seemed like they were down 14 immediately. They did climb back in within 4. The problem is they just need so much from that starting unit. I'm not even joking. They need the starting unit to play every goddamn minute, and Tibbs would love to do that to that point. He basically killed Karl Anthony Towns.
I was about to say, like, Karl Anthony Towns is like holding his knee in place, and Tibbs like, yeah, here's an aspirin, get back out there. The game, you're down 18 points with 3 minutes left, but who gives a fuck? Like, I know this is classic Tibbs stuff, but does that make it any more acceptable? Like, what are we doing to Karl Anthony Towns?
I mean, he's gonna die on his shield, so you might as well like make the most of this season. Anyway, I just like if you rely on the starters more in playoff series, I could see whether they could be a little bit more competitive. The problem is that you're just wearing them down in the regular season to the point where like even their somewhat deep team, at least for a Tibbs team last year, fell apart because these guys were just grinding out games in the middle of February. And so it's gotten to the point now where as we get the day-by-day Mitchell Robinson update, that seemed like the type of move if he came back and was productive and could make them big in the front court, at least give him that option. It would push them over the top. Now it seems like it's necessary just to make do, just to get by, to get us to the point where we're still the number 3 seed in the Eastern Conference, and that's a really tough place. They seem desperate at this point.
So 2 things about the Mitchell Robinson thing. One, they told us when training camp started he'd be back in January. He's now doing full contact. It's February. It's about to be March, y'all.
Yep.
Okay? So there's that part of it. 2, I like what Mitchell Robinson can do in the regular season in terms of shoring up the defense, like kind of cleaning up their big man rotation between Cat and Precious, and just helping them sort of just plug a couple of holes and leaks in the ship so that they're not completely drowning on that end. However, Mitchell Robinson, recipient of 5 ankle surgeries, he's just not the player I think is going to make you a better defense against Boston. I actually think Precious Achiuwa is actually way more suited to the Boston style of offense and defending that than Mitchell Robinson is. And so, like, I like what Mitchell Robinson is going to do in the playoffs. I mean, in the regular season, in terms of letting Cat play the 4 like he was doing last year in Minnesota. Letting Precious come in there when he has to, not like overdoing his contributions, but like, when I read that 0-7 stat line against the 3 best teams in the NBA, Mitchell Robinson to me does nothing to fix the issues that they faced when they played these elite teams.
No, I think he'll be helpful against some of the other run-of-the-mill teams in the East as the Knicks are fighting for seeding and just trying to like right this thing. That's helpful. But in addition to everything you laid out, Waz, when was the last time we saw Mitchell Robinson not only on the court, but look like Mitchell Robinson? Like, the last time we saw him be actually good in his usual form was November 2023, I want to say. Like, we are a long way removed from the version of Mitchell Robinson you may remember. And even in those best of times, he is not a disciplined defender. He's a good rim protector. He's a good rebounder. He's a live body inside. But yeah,
a nice offensive rebounder.
100%. But you put him out there guarding Kristaps Porzingis, and you think good things are going to happen? Like, there's no place for him in some of these matchups.
And that's the issue with the way the bracket is breaking, where it seems like it's going to be Cavs, Celtics, Knicks 1, 2, 3, unless something dramatic happens, unless the Cavs are just struck by injuries. And for the Knicks to have to go through the Celtics to get to the Cavs is pretty much a non-starter. They look worse against the Celtics than virtually any of these matchups. I could see where like the offense is so juiced, and we should mention they are tied for third in offense with the Celtics. The offense is incredible and can be if those guys are all healthy. And I could see it where like, oh, they steal it against the Cavs just because they have the stretch in order to force the Cavs to play in the shootout.
And the Cavs
I just don't see
they're going to play a lot
of
of two big lineups. They're going to give them places to, excel at. The Celtics are not.
Yeah. And here's the other question. Like, do we think that the Knicks can stay at the 3? Because for a while we had talked about them as part of the 1, 2, 3, but if anything, they're starting to slip farther and farther. They're 4 games up on the Pacers, who are 4th, but it doesn't look that far of a chasm considering the way they've been playing for practically half a month now.
Yeah, and the Pacers, since January 1st, one of the best teams in the NBA. Like, one of the best point differentials, top 10 on both sides of the ball. They've cleaned up so much in the way that they're playing. I think they're the most credible threat if you're talking about a team that could be as good as the Knicks, competitive with the Knicks, potentially overtake them in the standings. With all due respect to Kyle Kuzma's Bucks, I don't think that they're going to make that kind of run necessarily. But a Pacers team that is back to its usual style with Halliburton playing so aggressively again. They've had to make do with and without Miles Turner. It hasn't mattered. They've been able to make it all work. Indy has such a good, deep regular season rotation that I could see them really putting up a fight here as far as who the best team or the third best team in the Eastern Conference is.
I think Indy and Milwaukee both match up better with the Celtics than do the Knicks. Do I necessarily think head-to-head? I probably pick the Knicks over both of those teams in a head-to-head matchup. But, again, the matchups and the styles do make the fights in terms of who has a better chance. I just think both of those teams can credibly say they've played Boston better, more competitively than the Knicks have in the past 2 seasons.
Yeah.
Rob likes the Pacers. Waz likes the Bucks. It's like November 2023 for us too.
We're all right back.
Next up, we got to talk about awards because this is starting to become more of a conversation. We've got what is it, like month plus left of data in order to pour over, but it seems like the MVP race is a 2-man race, according at least to some of the straw poll action happening on ESPN and other places. I want to talk first and foremost about All NBA. Because one of the fallouts of Wemby's pretty tragic, what would we call it? Not an injury, just
Health scare?
Health
situation?
Health situation. One of the fallouts of Wemby's potentially tragic health situation there.
Potentially tragic may be too strong.
Too strong?
I like that. That makes it sound like he's on his deathbed, You
don't know that he isn't.
I mean, I don't know that he isn't.
But what if he never plays again? That would be a tragedy, no?
That would be, but we don't have any reason to think that's what's going to happen.
Okay, cool.
One of the fallouts of Wemby's health situation that we talked about in last week's pod is that he is now ineligible for awards consideration. And I had probably penciled it in. I hadn't really done the hard work yet about All-NBA, penciling him in the 5th spot. And so all of a sudden that becomes open in a way that I wasn't expecting. I'm curious what you guys have in pencil right now as you're kind of queuing this thing up. I think like the 4 first spots are pretty much set, right? It's Jokic, SGA, Giannis, Tatum. Does everybody have those guys?
No question.
Now that 5th spot, at least to me, seems wide open. Do you guys think that there's a clear-cut guy, or what are you thinking there?
I don't think there's a clear-cut guy, and honestly, Giannis only has, I think, like 5-ish games to spare as well. And so if he misses any time the rest of the way, there could be 2 spots all of a sudden up for grabs. I don't know where you are, Woz. I think top of my list right now in terms of who I think will make it, regardless of what I think and the actual like case that I would make, I think Donovan Mitchell will make it.
Yeah, it becomes one of those things where the Thunder have to have 2 All-Stars because they're so clearly the best team in the West, or it's gonna be one of those cases like Donovan Mitchell has to the Cleveland has to be represented on the first team All NBA ballot, and I can't say that I'm like completely against that.
Yeah, it's not a bad case that Mitchell has.
It's not, but. I think it's going to be jumbled too. Like somebody like AD, the way he was playing for the Lakers before suffering this injury, somebody I would have been completely fine with. Like that kind of candidacy is fine for me, but I understand why people might want to be like, what, Donovan Mitchell is the guy.
What do we think about LeBron? He's on the short list at the very least. On the one hand, earlier in the season, the defense was not credible enough in order to be on this sort of level, but he's picked it up on both ends at this point. The numbers are honestly a better statistical case than anybody else. He's only missed 4 games somehow this season, so he's going to be eligible for this. 25, 8, and 9. I didn't think I would get here at this point in the season, but he has a pretty compelling case at this point.
Well, especially if you do want to stack it up, not in the Cavs are required to have one representative kind of way, but just like his case against, say, Anthony Edwards, who Anthony Edwards, I would say, is having a more exemplary production season in some ways in terms of the load he carries in generating offense, what he means to driving the Wolves. Like he is doing a level of night-to-night lifting that LeBron, for everything he brings to the table for the Lakers, hasn't always had to have. That's not the right... let me take that again. He's doing a level of night-to-night heavy lifting that LeBron hasn't always. And so you can understand a case building for someone like Ant, but then you look in the standings, and this is a case where if the Lakers end up dramatically higher than the Wolves, that's going to pull Ant's case down. It's going to lift LeBron's case up. You're just getting to a point with LeBron where overall the quality of play, the resurgent defense that you mentioned, which I would say significantly predates Luka. It's really been more of like a turn of the calendar year kind of thing, if not a little before that. In addition to just the mounting momentum for the Lakers overall, it makes a pretty decent case. I think the short list right now is Mitchell, is LeBron, is Jalen Brunson and Cat, is Ant. And we probably need to at least have a conversation about Jaren Jackson Jr. Would you like to have that?
First team All NBA, like saying he's been one of the 5 best players in the NBA this year, even when you account for, or even top 7 players when you account for Luka missing all of these games and maybe Giannis falling off because of games missed. Like that seems like a far stretch to me to be like, all right, these guys who are normally penciled in, the Lukas and the Giannis's, because of these new rules they're taking out, and to be like Jaren Jackson has kind of been right behind him. I think that's a bit much.
It is a bit much, Justin. But let me make the case to you.
Mm-hmm.
If the Grizzlies end up as the second best team in the West, second seed in the West, Jaren Jackson Jr., because Victor Wembanyama is now ineligible for awards, wins Defensive Player of the Year, which seems like a real possibility. He's going to be one of the front runners for that award. If you're the Defensive Player of the Year, putting up close to 25 points a game as the first option on the number 2 seed in the West, aren't you a pretty viable All-NBA first-team candidate?
First option is a little bit of funny math there.
That is not. He is straight up the first option of the Memphis Grizzlies.
Well, but Morant is driving things when he's on the court. The problem is Morant's just not there. And like he is setting up Jackson. So if we're going to say the first option is Morant passing to Jaren Jackson, then yes.
They have devised an entire offense to not be reliant on John Morant doing exactly that. Like that is the structure of their team now.
When he's when he is playing, Morant is still
even when he's out there, they consciously go around him and they don't run pick and roll for that reason.
I think you're putting a little fine of a point on it. First option, I think Morant is definitely much more in the flow of what they're doing. But to say that Jaren is like the source of that, he has become the steady foundation of a very good team. And so if you want to,
Rob is making him their Nikola Jokic, and I don't like it.
he is not Nikola Jokic. I'm not saying that. But like leads the team in shot attempts, would lead the team in usage if not for Ja Morant's turnovers. Like he is that guy for them.
Well, you can't discount turnovers just because it doesn't fit the narrative that he's not doing as much. That's still part of usage.
Oh, it is part of usage. I'm just saying
it's not positive usage. It's just, but he's doing more.
He is doing a lot.
Your argument, yes.
My argument is that Ja Morant is more central to the way that the Grizzlies play this season, and this season only. I'm not saying past
this
season than Ja Morant is.
Yes,
sure,
I think
but
that
like,
is fair. Yes.
I get you're adding the defensive player of the year component, but again, like for me, like I'd still say Steph Curry is more deserving of the spot than Jaren Jackson is, and I've loved Jaren Jackson's season. I just feel like he's more, I don't know, he's more of a complimentary kind of player to me than a first team All NBA kind of guy. But I don't think it's wholly ridiculous. But if you're adding, because again, these narrative factors do factor into what voters choose to do. And I think we're going to get into the MVP and the quote unquote closeness or not closeness of that race. And I think narrative is driving that. I understand the narrative factor. I just think on the floor, I don't know. He doesn't feel like a first team All NBAer to me.
That's fair.
I'll say this. I think Jaren has completely raised the ceiling that I ever thought he would be, because he has managed to blend the version he was last year when he was basically playing through mistakes and figuring out his own offense with the player he was before. He has gotten his own stuff within the flow of the offense, and that's a credit to him. I didn't think he would ever get to this point where he was a regular, efficient 20 points per game scorer. And so maybe he's in the mix for a first-team All-NBA. I think he ultimately will settle into a second-team All-NBA. But I would often default to a guy like an Edwards who is driving a lot of the action over Jaren Jackson. Do you have Jaren Jackson on your short list for MVP as well? Are we getting to that point?
I mean, if my first team All NBA is not really very different from my top 5 MVP ballot. Like I don't see those things as being all that distinct. So I think he's got to be on the list, at least to make it on the back part of that ballot. Jaren Jackson Jr. is not the MVP. It's not even close as far as him to the actual front runners for that award. He's not a ballot
maker either. He's not on my ballot.
He probably will not make the ballot, but I think you have to have the conversation. Like I think that's where it is with him. And if anything, to me, that is part of a larger discussion about the 65 game rule and kind of what it is doing to things like All NBA. It's like we're going to end up with a team that may not feel all that representative a snapshot of where the league is right now because guys like Victor Wembanyama are not eligible for it. And I don't really know how to feel about that.
Yeah, especially if someone like Giannis were to miss more games down the stretch and just miss it, then it would start to feel bad. I get someone more like Wemby or some of these guys that have missed large chunks of games. Ja's another guy. I don't think he would make it into the All-NBA ballot, but like just those guys would miss so many games in a regular year that we wouldn't consider them probably anyway. Yeah. But you're right. It doesn't feel like our reality that we've experienced for now a couple months. And so that dissonance it's really tough to square at this point. I don't mind the rule, but when you're drawing a fine line between someone like 65 and 62, that's when I think it's going to start to be kind of an issue here. But let's talk about MVP just quickly, because as I kind of alluded to, it seems like it's a two-guy race at this point. According to the ESPN straw poll that happened a couple days ago, every first place vote went to either Shai Gilgeous-Alexander or Nikola Jokic. I would have assumed, based on being in the Stockholm syndrome of this podcast, that Jokic was far and away the guy who got the majority of those. But Shai had 70 to Jokic's 30.
Yeah.
And as I'm just like hearing guys on the broadcast, just looking at what's going on in the discourse, there's just this assumption that Shai is going to win this that I personally have found shocking. Are you picking up on the same thing?
I feel like our influence is not as strong as we need it to be. That's what I'm hearing. Like we need to get out there helping the people understand what's going on with the Denver Nuggets this season.
I think, again, the case is close enough. Jokic having already won 3 of these things.
Yeah.
This season not feeling like some huge, like I think this is his best season, but it doesn't feel like some huge leap from the previous MVP seasons. Like his own standard is not being dwarfed. It's like he's just adding on to his already insane standard. And so you add all of those narrative factors and Shai playing. Look, Like, I just looked at all the numbers, man. Like, there's really no number that supports Shea Gilgeous-Alexander actually having a more solid season. Like, the scoring efficiency, the playmaking on Jokic's part, like, even like the defensive stats, fraudulent as some people might find them. Like, Jokic has good defensive stats too. Like, there's no, and I'm not talking about blocks and steals. I'm talking about like how his teams
Yeah.
perform defensively while he's on the court. Like, there's nothing indicating that Shea has had a better season. There's no clear-cut indication of this. The only case for him is that Jokic has already won 3. That's it. That's his case. And this would be Shea's first. And also, the team is not just number 1 in the West, but dominating in terms of
Yes.
point differential. And Shea's minutes are obviously insane. But then you look at Jokic on and off, and it's like the differential is crazy too. But then you say, oh, that's because he has a whacker team behind him. Like, I just don't see the clear-cut case for Shea having a better season than Jokic, but I understand why voters are just like, I'm giving it to the kid with this great story.
Yeah, I think he will win. I just don't think he
Yes.
should win. Like, to me, if you're the best player in the world and your team
Yeah.
is reasonably in the mix and the Nuggets are 3rd seed in the West, you should win. And Nikola Jokic is the best player in the world. That's no slight to Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, who's awesome, but he's not quite at that level. And very few players in the history of the league have been at the level that Jokic is at right now.
Yeah, it's tough to square when we have given Jokic 3 awards, and so we clearly value what he has brought. Not just us in this room, but also the voting body at large. They value what Jokic brings, right? And now he's doing that better than ever before. So how do you not give him another one if he's just doing what you already awarded better? It just logically it doesn't make sense there. It has to be voter fatigue. It has to be because of the Thunder's regular season standings. But it's not like the Nuggets have performed so poorly. This isn't like one of Jokic's earlier MVPs where I believe they were like kind of lower in the standings. This isn't a Russell Westbrook. The Thunder are 6th in the standing where he's just bringing up everybody around him. Like, they're squarely in the mix. They're clearly, I think, consensus number 2 team.
Also, nobody
in the
thought
Western
Russell
Conference.
Westbrook was the best player in the league. When he,
No.
people were like, well, he's doing the triple doubles and he's blah,
Yes.
blah, blah. And I was one of those people. But nobody's like, yeah, Russ is the best player in the league, easily. Nobody believed that when he won MVP.
Well, do you value that? Because I think look at this more as like the body of the work of an individual season rather than maybe the best player in the world conversation, which is a little bit different. I might start to work in some of the FIBA stuff and just generally just what we know about these guys.
I think I start from the place of who are the best players in the league and who are the ones who are delivering on that promise, who aren't just like, oh, I'm a great player who's coasting through the regular season. I'm a great player who isn't meeting the games played threshold. Like, Nikola Jokic is the best player by production. He's the best player by impact. He's the best player by what he is to Denver every night. Shea is like an amazing contributor in so many different ways, an unbelievable one-on-one scorer, clearly the driver of OKC's offense. And if you wanted to make an argument that's kind of in the Allen Iverson, Derrick Rose mold, as far as, Jokic is driving what Denver does well, but Shea is bailing out in some ways what OKC doesn't always do as well, right? They are a rickety offense that sometimes they do rely on the threes. Like, they rely so much on his ability to generate clean looks for himself and other people. I'm open to that argument. I just think you have quite a mountain to climb because Jokic is doing a lot of the same things but better.
Yeah, so I was just kind of surprised because it is kind of almost like a foregone conclusion. People talk about him as the eventual MVP winner. I'm just like, what happened? I almost feel like I was awakened from my slumber because I've been with you motherfuckers this whole time. It's just but the whole world has changed.
But this isn't dissimilar to Embiid's MVP case. It was like, look, he's playing closer.
Let's not go too far here.
I'm just saying it's the same thing. It's like he's playing close enough to as good as this guy. We're not trying to give him his 3rd straight one. All right? Like, somebody's close enough, let's give it to them. Especially somebody who has never won before, who's had a proven track record of being an excellent NBA player. Let's give it to him. Embiid's case was like, I'm not saying like he had no empirical case, but like most of it was narrative. Most of it was voter fatigue. And I think that's the same thing that's happening right now.
And Shea is a perfectly worthy MVP.
Hell yeah. I'm not going to lose sleep over it.
No, it's not going to be the kind of thing we look back at historically and like, oh my God, I can't believe Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, one of the greatest one-on-one scorers of basically his era at this point, doesn't deserve to win this award. Of course he does.
I think Jokic. I think Embiid's case was a little bit better than what you guys are remembering, but we don't have to get down that road.
Is it better than Shea's right now?
I think the difference in yes, I think it was. I think Embiid was more dominant and he was more essential to what the Sixers did than Shea is. I think Shea's team and supporting cast plays a lot into why the Thunder are successful. And their defense, as we mentioned, is partly why they're so successful. And Embiid, the whole thing was Embiid was just steamrolling people. Also, he played better down the stretch, and I think people forget that Jokic just basically waved his hand, was like, I'll see you in 2 months. I'm going to win the title instead. That has to factor in. Anyway, sure. Number 5, last one on the board. Who has it worse? Speaking of Embiid, who has it worse at this point from going from now onto next season and beyond, Phoenix or Philly?
It's Philly.
Yeah.
Phoenix... Yeah. They have, I think, the combination of KD and Devin Booker are better trade chips than Maxey and Embiid as a combination. So what do I mean by that? I mean, if either team decided to change course right now, and go in the complete opposite direction of what they've been pursuing for the last 3 years, I think Phoenix would probably come out with more stuff than what Philly does. And also, I don't think Philly is going to do that. I think they're going to just ride this thing out.
They're a little locked in.
And, yeah.
Would you feel differently about this, Woz, if Philly does, say, lose a bunch of games to close out this season and is able to keep their first-round pick? And, that keeping it at minimum means it's top 6. Potentially could be a top 3 or 4 pick for the Sixers at this point.
If the Sixers end up with the 6th pick in this year's draft, my instinct is to think they're going to draft Asar Thompson, Jonathan Kuminga. I don't know. Guys that we think are talented.
Yeah.
Oh,
I think
yeah,
it would be
more
for
trade it for somebody more established.
Right.
Okay,
I think that would
I
be
thought
the
you were
idea.
talking about their future being brighter. But I guess they could use that to improve upon what's happening here.
It's tough.
The season that Paul George is having, the freaking the knee, the Embiid knee, where it's just there's nothing left to operate on, guys. It's just a degenerative ailment that he has. His knee is just getting worse and worse. That's just what the reality is of his injury. And then you combine Paul George has got 3 years left on the deal, and he looks like a pumpkin. Then you combine the fact that Embiid signed a 3-year, $190 million extension in September, which means that there's 4 years left on his deal after this year at about an average of about $58 million or something like that. It's looking real spooky in Philadelphia right now, I must say. Sorry, Chris Ryan.
I don't know how Daryl Morey survives this if he were to ever try to pivot away from the current construction, which is already so difficult, as Woz kind of outlined there, just because of all the contracts they have in the books. At the very worst case scenario, Phoenix could raise their entire team down. They would still have Devin Booker and either to have on their team or to trade away for other stuff. People will still give a lot for that, so you could turn the page in that instance, which is still quite bad. But in comparison to Philly, is anybody signing up for Joel Embiid? If we were to do the expansion draft and Embiid was eligible just because the Sixers wanted to get rid of him, he just isn't going to be able to play enough. Are the Vegas Blackjacks drafting Embiid in order to take a shot on him? Oh, you are?
Yeah.
Speaking for our war room, we're taking Joel Embiid.
We're taking Joel Embiid. Yeah,
what else you got going on?
Yeah, I think there's a difference between doing nothing for 2 to 3 years and maybe beyond that. I think that's a lot to ask of your fans if a guy on a max contract can't play for 4 years, because that's what we're talking about here. Yeah. He is now according to the reporting, basically clashing with the organization about whether he should or should not play through what he's going through. And it sounds like him playing more is doing more damage to his knee, which is going to cause, obviously, longer-term concerns. It's like, it's as dark as it gets.
It's not great when the language of these reports is about exploring like more radical treatment options. Like that's when we've kind of gone into the deep end with this stuff.
Yeah, they're gonna get like
bad.
cadaver PCLs and stuff to put in them. Like it's scary, just scary stuff. I look again. The 4 years left on his deal, where look, if he didn't play, let's just say he shut down right now. Immediately got the procedure done or whatever. It's now March. Training camp opens in September. That's 6 months from now. Mm-hmm. Is that it? Like, would he make it to training camp?
The fact that we have to ask the question is not good.
The press release would say he is going to be ready for training camp. We know that.
But here's the thing about
that
this.
At the Olympics too.
Yeah. Here's the thing about this Phoenix or Philadelphia dilemma. In terms of the state we can reasonably expect these players to be in, Kevin Durant is the best player. And if you were to shift directions in any meaningful way, Devin Booker is the single most valuable player that would get you the biggest possible return of anyone on either of these rosters. And I say that not because...
Even with Maxey, we love Maxey.
Oh, absolutely. But you can imagine, with Booker's skill set, if he were to hit the market, any team could talk themselves into Devin Booker. Like he fits basically every style. You could pencil him into any lineup. He's so versatile and so flexible in that way. And we just saw it with Team USA that he can play with other stars, right? Like he can fill any kind of role you need him to fill. And because of that, I think the bidding war would be substantial. But you have to talk yourself into Paul George. You have to talk yourself into Joel Embiid. Tyrese Maxey has a lot of admirers around the league, is turning out to be a really great player, but I just don't think would get the kind of frothing market ultimately that Devin Booker would.
What about this season specifically? We're talking about you have to turn on either team. You have to watch every game of this one team the entire season. Who has had the worst vibes, the Suns or the Philly?
Ugh.
That's tough because you're talking about all-time terrible vibes here, but I would like to read a text from, let's just say a mutual colleague of ours. Who texted me having been to the Spurs and Suns game the other night. And the quote was at Spurs and Suns last night. I cannot believe it's not a national story how much Durant hates every person on the Suns like they stole his fucking car. The text message thread continues. Cursing out Bud. Getting in a fight with CP3. I guess they don't like each other because Durant basically got him traded from Phoenix. This was a parenthetical. Not dapping up any of his teammates till the game got a little close in the fourth quarter. Stood in the far corner on the other side and end of the court during Spurs free throws and basically was a decoy on Suns offense. And mind you, this was his Austin homecoming game. Forgot that Durant is a Longhorn like one Rob Mahoney.
Yeah, don't forget. You cannot forget that hook'em, obviously.
The KD thing has become completely and utterly toxic over there. Toxic. It's untenable. Like the idea that this guy's going to be suited up for them after this season is laughable. He's gone, and he's already gone. Like he's done. And so the injuries and Paul George he's just so big. He was an All-NBA player last year.
Yeah. He's
so bad. And the Joel just limping around and he can't jump over a freaking dictionary. Like, it's just, it's tough, y'all.
I know that the TikToks, now you tell us sort of stories that come out after these sorts of instances are always a little bit baked with water carrying. And you're not really sure, like, if you're getting the full story.
No, the KD thing is going to be real.
I can't wait to read this one. Just to find out how we got to the point where the Suns pivoted from trading for Jimmy Butler to entertaining trades for Kevin Durant out of Phoenix. There's a real, call the cops, but not for me sort of turnaround situation that happened there. It's like, I just don't understand. Did they realize that things were so bleak that is all they had at that point, that Katie was going to leave in the off? I don't know, but I want to find out, because that is one of the wildest circumstances that kind of got brushed aside as we were all like kind of our eyes were bugging out about Luka and everybody.
And just not to hit the crazy speculation, whatever, there's already speculation out there that Nico Harrison is going to try to trade for KD in the offseason. Like, all of this shit, like, it is what it is. But the Phoenix thing, it's true. Like, I think Phoenix just isn't a national obsession in the way the Sixers are. Call it East Coast bias. I don't know. But, like, the Sixers thing, I mean, the KD thing, it's bad, y'all. It's bad what's happening there.
It is bad. A question on that front. What is it that the Mavericks are going to trade for Kevin Durant?
I don't know.
Max Christie,
the Lakers picks they didn't get, their own picks that they don't have, and Dante Exum. Let's go.
Well, KD's got 1 year left on his deal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, so
yes,
it doesn't have to be that expensive for KD.
Yeah, I think he's going to pick his next team, which is going to be a little bit different than when he ultimately went to Phoenix.
It's going to be a Jimmy Bucket situation again.
Yeah, and so
Sheesh.
maybe he'll have more of a hand. It seemed like Phoenix was just frothing at the mouth in order to get him from Brooklyn. He kind of just went along with the plan there. So, like, I don't know how much you could really ding him for, once again, picking a bad situation. But it is one of the wildest back half of a career, and it's now becoming practically half of his career, for a player who's going to go down as like one of the top 15, top 20, 25, whatever you want to put KD, that I can ever remember. He just like has been irrelevant from the broader title race outside of when they traded for James Harden. Like, they were very much a very good team there. They just never got out of the second round. He hasn't been out of the second round since he left Golden State in 2019.
Yeah.
It's wild.
I was talking to somebody who used to work with KD early on in his career, and, you know, if you guys, and he reminded me of something. He was like, yo, this guy was universally beloved amongst the fandom.
Yep.
And it's this person's belief that, like, if KD would have managed his career a certain way, he would have been just as big, if not bigger, than LeBron. That's like the direction everything was moving towards for him in terms of his Q rating with every average fan, young fans. That OKC team was a sensation. And, like, for it to turn out the way that it has, where it's like he's going to basically sourpuss his way out of another situation, it's tough, man. It's really tough.
Yeah.
I'm not defending his sourpuss temperament. The problem with Phoenix is that there are so many problems with Phoenix. And so it's like, on the one hand, I get why he would be a little sour about it. I get why, if you're Kevin Durant, having a pretty good Kevin Durant season, why you would look around and say, like, can we really not make this work in any conceivable way? Can we not be a baseline functional NBA team? That would seem like a pretty frustrating position to find yourself in if you're a player of that caliber. But to hear that the vibes might get even worse if there is like a prolonged trade situation, that this could be the start of something horrendous for Phoenix and not hopefully close to the end of it, is just so dispiriting. And so, like, to answer your question, Justin, I think the answer might, oddly enough, be the Sixers, and that's a team that has like three guys I enjoy watching and that have actually played hard.
That's crazy.
I think I might agree with Rob. I mean, Phoenix is 2-8 over their past 10 games. The 2 wins have come against Chicago, a game that went down to the wire, which I watched because I have zero self-respect for myself, and against Utah, a game that went into overtime. Like, they are struggling against the absolute bottom of the barrel of the NBA right now. It's very bad.
I mean, they just got run off the court by the Raptors. And granted, the Sixers got punked by the Nets with everybody playing for them, more or less. You know, no Jared McCain, obviously, but Embiid, Maxey, Paul George, those guys are all out there, and you're losing to the Brooklyn Nets. The resurgent Brooklyn Nets, granted, but still the Brooklyn Nets.
Oh, man.
It's not good. Salute to Gershon Yabusele, salute to Kelly Oubre, salute to Quentin Grimes, and salute to absolutely nobody else.
The Sixers thing to me is ultimately more depressing because people legitimately thought they could make a run to the NBA Finals this year. You know, watching how Maxey performed in the playoffs last year, Embiid being Embiid, Paul George being All-NBA player, people liked the sort of supporting cast that they put around them. in terms of how Morey filled out the rest of the roster. Like, people were excited about this team, and they are headed to the bottom basement of the Eastern Conference, just unceremoniously. It's bleak, guys.
I think that's a good point to bring up as we inevitably get into our offseason conversations about the little moves that we like and the way these teams are rounding out their rosters. On the one hand, we can be very, very wrong on paper how these things will actually work when it comes to these, especially like veteran minimum kind of signings. But when you think about what's happened to Philly, like Eric Gordon has not been good basically the entirety of the season and has been injured. Shocker. Andre Drummond is unplayable, right? Yeah. Like all of these guys that they brought in, except for Yabusele, I would say, on kind of bargain contracts, have not worked out. They've already moved on from Caleb Martin. They've already traded Reggie Jackson. He wasn't useful for them at all. Like, none of those turned out to be actual players. And you can't have that many whiffs and still be a functional team, especially when you're as top-heavy as the Sixers are.
Yep. We've been talking about it all season. It's a young man's league. You know, and looking back on it, it is odd that nobody questioned Paul George at age 4, showing signs of a lack of aggression, getting a full 4-year max contract just right off the bat. I know he was super efficient last year. I know he is the type of guy you want around 2 stars like Embiid and Maxey, but like, you know, I think the fact that he's declining is totally normal. I wonder if LeBron has just completely warped our brains to think like a late 30s guy just can compete at an all-star level for this long into his career. So
the thing is the fall off from LeBron, probably second, third, first best player ever, to whatever the hell he was at 35, to whatever Paul George's peak, which is decidedly not that.
No.
And to what he is at 35, it's just a big difference, man.
All right, let's wrap it there. Thank you to Ben Cruz on production. We'll be back on Thursday as usual. Talk to you then.